Sarah Martinez never imagined that her culinary skills would one day save lives on a battlefield. At 28, she had spent the last 6 years working as a mess hall supervisor at Naval Base Coronado, feeding some of the most elite warriors in the world. Every morning at 0400 hours, she would arrive at the sprawling kitchen facility, tie her dark hair back in a regulation bun, and begin the intricate dance of preparing thousands of meals for Navy SEALs, support staff, and visiting personnel. The mess hall was Sarah's domain, a gleaming cathedral of stainless steel and industrial efficiency. She commanded a team of 12 cooks and kitchen staff with the precision of a military operation, though she herself had never served in combat. Her path to this position had been unconventional. After graduating from culinary school in San Diego, she had worked in several high-end restaurants before answering a job posting for the naval base. The stable hours, excellent benefits, and the opportunity to serve those who served their country had drawn her in. What she hadn't expected was how deeply she would come to care about the men and women who passed through her serving line each day. These weren't ordinary service members. The SEALs who ate her food were preparing for missions that could take them to the most dangerous corners of the world. Some would return with new scars and haunted eyes. Others wouldn't return at all. Sarah made it her personal mission to ensure that every meal was not just nutritionally sound, but a small comfort in their demanding lives. She memorized their preferences, learned their names, and often worked late into the evening preparing special meals for teams about to deploy. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the leader of SEAL Team 7, always requested extra coffee and her homemade energy bars before long missions. Petty Officer First Class Maria Santos preferred her scrambled eggs slightly runny and always thanked Sarah in Spanish. Chief Petty Officer Tom Bradley, a 20-year veteran with graying temples, had a weakness for Sarah's apple pie and would often linger after meals to share stories about his deployments. The base operated on a rhythm that Sarah had learned to read like music. Training exercises would bring waves of hungry, exhausted SEALs through her doors. Pre-deployment briefings meant smaller groups huddled over coffee and barely touched meals, their minds already focused on the missions ahead. And then, there were the quiet periods, when teams were deployed and the mess hall felt almost empty, filled only with support staff and new recruits going through basic underwater demolition training. On this particular Tuesday morning in November, Sarah noticed an unusual tension in the air. The base had been buzzing with activity for the past week, with increased security patrols and several high-ranking officers she didn't recognize visiting the command center. SEAL Team 7 had been in and out of briefings almost constantly, and Sarah had barely seen Jake Morrison except for quick visits to grab coffee and protein bars. As she supervised the breakfast preparation, Sarah's assistant cook, Marcus Thompson, wheeled in a cart of fresh vegetables from the delivery dock. Marcus was a 22-year-old Navy cook who had been working under Sarah for the past year. His enthusiasm sometimes exceeded his skill, but Sarah appreciated his eagerness to learn and his unwavering loyalty to the team. "Something big is happening," Marcus whispered as he began chopping onions for the breakfast omelets. "I heard from my buddy in communications that Team 7 is getting ready for an emergency deployment tonight." Sarah frowned as she checked the industrial ovens where hundreds of breakfast pastries were browning to perfection. Emergency deployments were never good news. They usually meant that something had gone wrong somewhere in the world, and American lives were in immediate danger. "We don't speculate about operations," she reminded Marcus, though her own mind was racing. "We just make sure our people are fed and ready for whatever comes next." The morning rush began at 0600 hours sharp. Hundreds of personnel flooded through the serving line, grabbing trays and moving with the efficient choreography that military life demanded. Sarah worked the main serving station, ladling out scrambled eggs, bacon, and hash browns while keeping one eye on the flow of people and another on her staff's performance. At 0630, Jake Morrison appeared at her station. The 34-year-old lieutenant commander looked tired, his usually sharp blue eyes showing the strain of whatever preparation had been consuming his time. His brown hair was shorter than usual, recently buzzed for what Sarah assumed was the upcoming mission. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken concerns. "I need to put in a special order for my team." "Of course," Sarah replied, filling his plate with extra portions of protein. "What do you need?" "We're going to need field rations prepared for 12 men," enough for 72 hours minimum. High energy, non-perishable, but... He paused, looking around to make sure no one was listening. Make them good. Really good. The guys are going to need every advantage they can get on this one. Sarah nodded, understanding the subtext. Long missions in hostile territory meant that food would be one of the few comforts available to the team. She had developed several special recipes for field rations over the years, using techniques she had learned from her grandmother who had lived through the Great Depression and knew how to make simple ingredients into satisfying meals. "I'll have everything ready by 1400 hours, she promised. Anything else? Jake hesitated for a moment, then leaned closer. Sarah, I need you to know that if anything happens while we're gone, you and your team are part of this base's security protocol. Captain Rodriguez will brief all department heads later today, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Just be aware of your surroundings, okay? The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she maintained her professional composure. Understood, sir. You just focus on bringing everyone home safe. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meal service and preparation. Sarah threw herself into creating the best field rations she could manage, using vacuum-sealed packaging and dehydration techniques to create meals that would sustain the SEALs during their mission. She prepared her special energy bars loaded with nuts, dried fruits, and protein powder. She made beef jerky using a recipe her father had taught her. She even included small portions of dark chocolate, knowing that the psychological boost of a small treat could be invaluable during difficult moments. At 1,100 hours, Captain Elena Rodriguez, the base's executive officer, called a meeting for all department heads. Sarah left Marcus in charge of lunch prep and made her way to the main conference room. The 15 other department heads were already seated around the polished oak table when she arrived. The mood was somber, and Sarah could see the tension in everyone's faces. Captain Rodriguez, a stern woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked hair, got straight to the point. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be brief because we all have jobs to do. Intelligence has indicated a credible threat to American personnel in the South Pacific. SEAL Team 7 is deploying tonight on a classified mission. While they're gone, we need to maintain heightened security here at Coronado. She clicked a remote, and a map appeared on the wall-mounted screen. There's been increased chatter about potential retaliation attacks on military installations. I'm not telling you this to cause panic, but to ensure everyone understands that we need to be vigilant. Report any suspicious activity immediately. Follow all security protocols to the letter. And make sure your teams understand the importance of operational security. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she absorbed this information. The base had always felt like a safe haven, protected by multiple layers of security and the presence of some of the most dangerous warriors in the world. The thought that they might be vulnerable while those warriors were deployed had never seriously occurred to her. Questions? Captain Rodriguez asked, scanning the room. The base security chief, Commander Walsh, raised his hand. What's our timeline for the elevated threat level? Indefinite, Rodriguez replied grimly. Until Team 7 returns and the situation in the Pacific is resolved. I want everyone to understand that this isn't a drill. We're dealing with sophisticated adversaries who have demonstrated the ability to gather intelligence and strike at unexpected targets. After the meeting, Sarah returned to her kitchen with a new sense of purpose. Her team needed to be prepared for anything, and she needed to ensure that the base's nutritional needs could be met even if normal supply chains were disrupted. She began mentally cataloging their stored supplies and thinking about contingency plans. The lunch service was busier than usual, filled with personnel who seemed to sense the heightened tension on base. Conversations were more subdued, and Sarah noticed more uniformed security walking through the mess hall than usual. She made sure to project calm confidence, knowing that her team would take their cues from her behavior. At 1,400 hours sharp, Jake Morrison returned with 2 other members of SEAL Team 7. Sarah had their field rations ready, packed in military-spec containers that would protect the food during transport and deployment. As she handed over the packages, Jake caught her eye. Thank you, he said simply. For everything you do for us. "Just bring everyone home," Sarah replied, the same words she always used when seeing teams off to deployment. But, as she watched the 3 SEALs walk away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this goodbye felt different somehow. More final. More weighted with unspoken fears and possibilities. The evening shift began with Sarah staying later than usual to oversee dinner service and complete her inventory of emergency supplies. She had discovered that they had enough non-perishable food to sustain the base for approximately 2 weeks if supply deliveries were interrupted. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. As she finally prepared to leave at 2100 hours, Sarah stopped by the main serving area one last time. The mess hall was empty now except for the night cleaning crew, but she could still feel the energy and purpose that filled this space during mealtimes. This was where warriors gathered before facing danger, where they found sustenance and sometimes a moment of peace before heading into the unknown. She thought about Jake Morrison and SEAL Team 7, probably somewhere over the Pacific Ocean by now, flying toward whatever crisis awaited them. She thought about her responsibility to maintain this sanctuary, to ensure that there would always be a warm meal and a safe place for them to return to. What Sarah didn't know, as she locked up the mess hall and headed to her small apartment on base, was that within 48 hours, everything she thought she understood about her role, her capabilities, and her courage would be tested in ways she never could have imagined. The quiet efficiency of her kitchen would give way to chaos and danger, and the woman who had spent years nurturing others would find herself in a position where she would have to choose between safety and action. The peaceful rhythm of meal service and military routine was about to be shattered, and Sarah Martinez was about to discover that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most unexpected places. 2 days after SEAL Team 7's departure, Sarah's routine had settled into the heightened awareness that Captain Rodriguez had requested. Security checkpoints took longer, personnel moved with more purpose, and there was an underlying current of tension that even the most mundane activities couldn't dispel. Sarah found herself paying closer attention to faces in her mess hall, noting anyone who seemed out of place or unfamiliar. Thursday morning began like any other, with Sarah arriving before dawn to begin breakfast preparations. Marcus was already there, having developed a habit of coming in early to help with the increased workload that came with having additional security personnel on base. They worked in comfortable silence, preparing for what they expected would be another routine day of feeding nearly 1,000 people. At 0800 hours, Sarah was reviewing the lunch menu when her secure phone buzzed with an emergency alert. All department heads were to report to the command center immediately. Sarah's heart rate accelerated as she handed responsibility for the mess hall to her senior cook, Janet Williams, a 45-year-old Navy veteran who had been working in military kitchens for over 20 years. "Keep everything running smoothly," Sarah told Janet as she grabbed her jacket. "I'll be back as soon as I can." The command center was in chaos when Sarah arrived. Multiple screens displayed maps, satellite feeds, and streams of text that she couldn't quite read from her position near the back of the room. Captain Rodriguez stood at the center of it all, her face grim as she coordinated with various personnel. Admiral James Crawford, the base commander, was present as well, something Sarah had never seen during a departmental briefing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Crawford began, his voice carrying the gravity of someone delivering devastating news. At approximately 0200 hours local time, SEAL Team 7 was captured during their mission in the South Pacific. "We have confirmed intelligence that 12 of our finest warriors are being held by a terrorist organization with significant resources and international connections." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of electronic equipment. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she processed the Admiral's words. Jake Morrison, Chief Bradley, the others she had served meals to just 2 days ago, they were now prisoners, their lives hanging in the balance. "The situation is complicated by several factors," Admiral Crawford continued. "The terrorist organization, which calls itself the Pacific Liberation Front, has made it clear that any rescue attempt will result in the immediate execution of our personnel. They have also indicated that they have intelligence about potential targets for retaliation attacks, specifically mentioning U.S. naval installations." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, consulting a tablet in her hands. "Intelligence suggests that Coronado may be a primary target for a diversionary attack while our attention is focused on the hostage situation. We're implementing Code Orange security protocols effective immediately. All non-essential personnel are being relocated off base, and we're requesting immediate support from multiple agencies. Sarah's mind raced as she absorbed this information. The mess hall would need to continue operating to feed the remaining personnel, but with reduced staff and heightened security concerns. More importantly, 12 men she cared about were in mortal danger, and there seemed to be little anyone could do to help them. Department heads, Admiral Crawford said, scanning the room, I need each of you to prepare contingency plans for maintaining operations with skeleton crews. Ms. Martinez, he said, looking directly at Sarah, your facility will be critical for maintaining morale and functionality. Can you operate with reduced staff if necessary? Yes, sir, Sarah replied without hesitation, though her mind was already calculating the logistics. We can maintain basic meal service with as few as 4 people if needed. Good. I want everyone to understand that the next 72 hours are critical. We're working multiple diplomatic channels to secure our people's release, but we must also prepare for the possibility of direct action. Stay alert, follow protocols, and report anything suspicious immediately. As the meeting disbanded, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Commander Walsh, the base security chief, his expression serious but not unkind. Sarah, I need to talk to you privately, he said, steering her away from the other departing department heads. They walked to a quiet corner of the corridor outside the command center before Walsh spoke again. We've received specific intelligence that the mess hall may be a target for infiltration. These people know our routines, our personnel, our weaknesses. They might try to plant someone in your kitchen staff or use the food supply as a delivery method for weapons or explosives. Sarah felt her stomach turn at the implications. Her kitchen, the place where she had spent years creating comfort and nourishment for warriors, could become a weapon against them. What do you need me to do? She asked. First, I need you to provide a complete list of everyone who has access to your facilities, staff, delivery personnel, maintenance workers, everyone. Second, I need you to implement additional security protocols for food preparation and service. Third, he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully, I need you to understand that you might see or hear things that seem suspicious. If that happens, you contact me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Sarah nodded, though part of her was already thinking about how impossible it would be to verify the identity and intentions of every person who interacted with her operation. The mess hall was a hub of activity involving dozens of people every day. Returning to her kitchen, Sarah found Janet managing the lunch rush with her usual competence, but she could see the stress in her team's faces. Word had spread about the capture of SEAL Team 7, and everyone on base was feeling the weight of uncertainty and fear. Sarah gathered her core team, Janet, Marcus, and senior cook David Park, in her office to explain the new security protocols. They would need to verify all deliveries personally, lock down access to food storage areas, and report any unusual behavior from personnel they didn't recognize. This is serious, Sarah told them. These aren't just enhanced security measures. The people who captured our SEALs might try to use our kitchen against us. We need to protect not just our food, but everyone who depends on us. The afternoon passed in a blur of modified routines and heightened vigilance. Every delivery truck was searched more thoroughly, every new face was questioned, and every aspect of food preparation was double-checked. Sarah found herself exhausted by the mental energy required to maintain normal operations while simultaneously watching for threats. At 1,600 hours, her secure phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct call from Captain Rodriguez. Sarah, I need you to prepare emergency rations for 200 personnel, enough for 5 days. Pack them for transport and have them ready by 2,000 hours tonight. Yes, ma'am. Is the base being evacuated? Negative. But we're preparing for multiple contingencies. Just have the rations ready. As Sarah coordinated with her team to prepare the massive order of emergency rations, she couldn't help but think about Jake Morrison and the rest of SEAL Team 7. Were they being fed? Were they injured? Were they even still alive? Marcus noticed her distraction as they worked side by side, vacuum sealing meal packages. They're going to be okay, he said quietly. SEALs are trained for this kind of thing. I know, Sarah replied, though she wasn't sure she believed it. I just keep thinking about all the meals we've shared, all the conversations. These aren't just names on a mission report. They're people we know. That's what makes you a good supervisor, Janet said from across the prep table. You care about them as individuals, not just as customers. The emergency rations were completed with an hour to spare, packed in waterproof containers and staged near the loading dock as requested. Sarah was reviewing her inventory calculations when Commander Walsh appeared at her office door. We need to talk, he said, his expression more serious than she had seen it before. They walked to a secure conference room where Admiral Crawford was waiting with two men Sarah didn't recognize. Their civilian clothes and serious demeanors suggested intelligence personnel. Ms. Martinez, Admiral Crawford began, these gentlemen are from the Department of Defense Intelligence Agency. They have information that directly concerns your operation. The taller of the two men, who introduced himself only as Agent Thompson, opened a laptop and turned the screen toward Sarah. It displayed a series of photographs showing people she didn't recognize. We have reason to believe that one or more of these individuals may attempt to gain access to your facility within the next 24 hours, Agent Thompson said. They're part of the same organization that captured SEAL Team 7, and they're specifically targeting food service operations at military installations. Sarah studied the faces on the screen, two men and one woman, all appearing to be in their 20s or 30s, unremarkable except for a hardness around their eyes that spoke of violence and purpose. What's their objective? Sarah asked. The second agent, who had introduced himself as Agent Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, leaned forward. Multiple possibilities. They could be planning to poison food supplies, plant explosive devices, gather intelligence about base operations, or simply create chaos and confusion to support other operations. We're not telling you this to frighten you, Admiral Crawford added, but because you and your team are our first line of defense against this threat. You know your operation better than anyone. You know who belongs there and who doesn't. Agent Thompson closed the laptop and looked directly at Sarah. There's something else you need to know. We have intelligence suggesting that the capture of SEAL Team 7 wasn't random. These terrorists have detailed knowledge of our base operations, personnel schedules, and security protocols. Someone has been feeding them information. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. There was a traitor somewhere on the base, someone with access to classified information who had betrayed 12 of the finest warriors in the world. Are you saying someone in my kitchen could be involved? Sarah asked. We're saying we don't know who's involved, Agent Martinez replied. That's why we need you to be extremely careful about who you trust and what information you share. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Not only did she need to maintain meal service for hundreds of people under enhanced security conditions, but she also had to watch for potential infiltrators while wondering if someone she trusted might be working against them. Returning to her kitchen for the evening shift, Sarah looked at her team with new eyes. Janet, who had been working military kitchens for decades and had earned Sarah's complete trust. Marcus, young and enthusiastic, but with access to communication networks through his friends in other departments. David Park, quiet and efficient, but with family connections that Sarah realized she knew very little about. For the first time since taking over the mess hall operation, Sarah felt truly alone. The people she had trusted to help her care for the base's warriors might themselves be the source of the threat. As she supervised the dinner service, watching familiar faces and trying to spot signs of deception or suspicious behavior, Sarah understood that everything she thought she knew about her role was about to change. The captured SEALs were depending on their fellow warriors to rescue them, but those warriors were depending on people like Sarah to protect the base while they focused on the mission. The woman who had spent years perfecting recipes and managing meal schedules was about to become a guardian, whether she was ready for that responsibility or not. Night fell over Naval Base Coronado like a curtain, and Sarah Martinez prepared to face whatever challenges the darkness might bring. Friday morning arrived with an unseasonable fog that seemed to blanket Naval Base Coronado in an ominous gray shroud. Sarah had barely slept, her mind cycling through faces, conversations, and details from the past several days as she tried to identify any signs she might have missed. Every interaction with her team now felt loaded with potential significance, every unfamiliar face in her mess hall a possible threat. At 0430 hours, Sarah arrived at her kitchen to find Marcus already there, which had become his routine since the heightened security began. But, this morning, something felt different. Marcus was moving with an efficiency that seemed almost too practiced, as if he was working from muscle memory rather than his usual enthusiastic trial-and-error approach. "You're early again," Sarah observed, watching him carefully as he began prep work for breakfast. "Couldn't sleep," Marcus replied without looking up from the vegetables he was chopping. "Keep thinking about Team 7. Wondering if they're getting fed properly." It was a natural response, one that Sarah shared, but something in Marcus's tone seemed rehearsed. She made a mental note to pay closer attention to his behavior throughout the day. The morning briefing came at 0600 hours via secure communication. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through Sarah's encrypted radio with updates that made her stomach clench with worry. "All department heads, this is command. Intelligence indicates increased chatter about imminent operations targeting West Coast naval installations. Threat level remains code orange. Additionally, diplomatic efforts to secure the release of SEAL Team 7 have stalled. The terrorists are demanding the release of captured operatives from federal facilities, which is not negotiable. Military options are being explored." Sarah understood the subtext. If diplomatic solutions failed, a rescue mission would be attempted. But rescue missions in hostile territory were dangerous for everyone involved, and there was no guarantee that the hostages would survive the attempt. The breakfast service proceeded normally until 0745 hours, when a delivery truck arrived at the loading dock. Sarah personally supervised the inspection, as had become protocol, but the driver was someone she had never seen before. He was roughly 30 years old, medium height, with dark hair and the kind of unremarkable features that would make him easy to forget, exactly the type of person Agent Thompson had warned her to watch for. "Where's Rodriguez?" Sarah asked, referring to their usual delivery driver from the base commissary. "Called in sick," the new driver replied, his accent suggesting he might be from the Southwest. "I'm filling in today. Got all the paperwork here." He handed Sarah a clipboard with delivery forms that appeared legitimate, but she noticed that his hands were calloused in a way that suggested more physical training than typical delivery work required. More concerning was the small scar near his left ear that looked like it might have come from communications equipment. "I'll need to see your base access credentials," Sarah said, stalling for time while she tried to decide if her suspicions were justified or if stress was making her paranoid. As the driver reached for his wallet, Sarah caught sight of a tattoo on his wrist, a small symbol that meant nothing to her, but which was partially concealed as if he had tried to cover it with makeup. Every instinct she had developed over 6 years of dealing with military personnel told her that something was wrong. "Marcus," she called to her assistant, who was approaching with a dolly to help unload the truck. "Go grab Commander Walsh from security. Tell him we need him at the loading dock immediately." The driver's demeanor changed subtly but noticeably. His casual slouch straightened slightly, and his eyes became more alert, scanning the area around the loading dock as if assessing escape routes or potential threats. "Is there a problem?" the driver asked, his voice remaining calm but taking on an edge that confirmed Sarah's suspicions. "Just routine verification," Sarah replied, trying to project the same calm efficiency she used during busy meal services. "Should only take a few minutes." Marcus hurried off toward the security office while Sarah engaged the driver in conversation, hoping to keep him relaxed until help arrived. She asked about his route, his experience with deliveries, anything to maintain normal interaction while studying his responses for inconsistencies. Commander Walsh arrived within 3 minutes, accompanied by 2 security personnel. The driver's eyes tracked their movement with the kind of tactical awareness that no legitimate delivery driver would possess. "Sir," Sarah said to Walsh, "this gentleman is filling in for our regular driver. I wanted you to verify his credentials before we proceed with the delivery." Walsh stepped forward, his hand casually resting near his sidearm. "I'll need to see your identification and delivery authorization, along with your vehicle registration." The driver reached into his jacket, and, for a moment Sarah thought he might be going for a weapon. Instead, he produced a wallet and handed over what appeared to be legitimate documentation. But Walsh's expression changed as he examined the papers more closely. "This delivery manifest is for Tuesday," Walsh said quietly. "Today is Friday." The driver's facade cracked completely. Instead of offering an explanation, he suddenly bolted toward his truck, moving with the fluid speed of someone with military or paramilitary training. Walsh shouted for security backup while drawing his weapon, but the driver had already reached his vehicle. What happened next unfolded in seconds that felt like minutes to Sarah. The driver gunned the truck's engine and crashed through the loading dock barrier, speeding toward the base perimeter. Security vehicles converged from multiple directions, but the truck had a head start and appeared to be heading for a section of the base fence that Sarah knew was under construction. "Lock down the entire food service area," Walsh ordered his security team. "Nobody in or out until we've searched everything." As alarms began sounding across the base, Sarah realized that her suspicions had been correct, but that raised even more disturbing questions. If this man had been attempting to infiltrate her kitchen, what had he planned to do? And, more importantly, how had he known enough about their delivery schedule to attempt such a deception? The security sweep of the mess hall took 3 hours and revealed several disturbing discoveries. Hidden in the truck that the fake driver had abandoned were military-grade explosives, enough to level a significant portion of the mess hall and kill anyone inside during a meal service. More troubling were the detailed floor plans of the kitchen facility and personnel schedules that showed intimate knowledge of base operations. But the most shocking discovery came when security searched the staff areas of the mess hall. In Marcus's locker, they found an encrypted communication device and a small camera that could have been used to record operational details. Sarah watched in disbelief as security personnel placed Marcus in restraints. The young man she had mentored for over a year, who had seemed so eager to serve and learn, had been feeding information to terrorists. His enthusiasm about working early, his questions about meal schedules and personnel rotations, it all made horrifying sense in retrospect. "How long?" Sarah asked Commander Walsh as they watched Marcus being led away. "How long was he working for them?" "We don't know yet," Walsh replied grimly. "But, based on the intelligence these people had about SEAL Team 7's mission, possibly months." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus had been present for countless conversations about team deployments, mission preparations, and operational schedules. He had access to information about when teams would be away from base, when security might be lighter, when the mess hall would be most vulnerable. "The capture of Team 7, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did he?" "We're investigating that possibility," Walsh confirmed. "The timing suggests that information from inside this base contributed to their capture." Sarah felt a wave of nausea as she considered the implications. Her trust in Marcus, her failure to recognize the signs of his deception, might have contributed to the capture of 12 brave men who were now facing torture and possible execution. Captain Rodriguez arrived at the mess hall as the initial security sweep was concluding. Her expression was grim as she surveyed the damage to the loading dock and the disruption to normal operations. "Status report," she demanded. Commander Walsh briefed her on the attempted infiltration and the discovery of Marcus's betrayal. Rodriguez listened without interruption, her face growing harder with each detail. The explosives were sophisticated, Walsh concluded. If this attack had succeeded during a meal service, we could have lost hundreds of personnel, including critical command staff who eat here regularly. Rodriguez turned to Sarah. "I need to know if there are any other security concerns with your remaining staff. Can you vouch for everyone else?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Janet had been working military kitchens for decades and had a security clearance that required regular background checks. David Park had been on base for 3 years and had never shown any signs of suspicious behavior. But, after being so wrong about Marcus, Sarah wasn't sure she could trust her judgment about anyone. "I believe the others are loyal," Sarah said carefully. "But, I thought the same about Marcus yesterday." "Understood. We're implementing additional background checks for all food service personnel. In the meantime, your operation will continue with enhanced security oversight." As the afternoon progressed, Sarah struggled to maintain normal meal service while processing the magnitude of what had almost happened. The mess hall that had always felt like a sanctuary was revealed to be vulnerable in ways she had never imagined. The young man she had trusted and mentored had been planning to use her kitchen as a weapon against the very people she was trying to serve. But, perhaps most troubling was the realization that somewhere in the Pacific, Jake Morrison and 11 other SEALs were paying the price for security failures that might have originated right here in her kitchen. The information Marcus had gathered could have contributed to their capture, and Sarah couldn't escape the feeling that she bore some responsibility for their current situation. Evening brought new intelligence that made the day's revelations even more disturbing. The fake delivery driver had been captured attempting to reach a speedboat offshore, and his interrogation had revealed the scope of the terrorist organization's plan. The attack on the mess hall had been intended as a diversion, designed to create chaos on base while a larger operation targeted the naval station's communication facilities. The goal had been to blind the base's ability to coordinate rescue operations for SEAL Team 7 while simultaneously eliminating key personnel who would normally manage such operations. It was a sophisticated plan that demonstrated detailed knowledge of base operations and the importance of various facilities. They knew exactly when and where to strike for maximum impact, Agent Thompson explained during an emergency briefing. The capture of the SEALs was never the end goal. It was bait to draw our attention away from the real target. Sarah absorbed this information with a growing sense of anger that surprised her with its intensity. These terrorists hadn't just threatened her facility and the people she served. They had betrayed her trust by corrupting someone she cared about, and they had used that betrayal to harm warriors who depended on base personnel to keep them safe. As she returned to her kitchen that evening to prepare for the next day's operations, Sarah looked around her domain with new eyes. The stainless steel surfaces and industrial equipment remained the same, but everything else had changed. She was no longer just a mess hall supervisor responsible for feeding hungry personnel. She had become a guardian, someone whose vigilance and decisions could mean the difference between life and death for hundreds of people. The woman who had spent years perfecting recipes and managing meal schedules was about to discover that her greatest test wouldn't come in the kitchen, but in the dangerous world beyond it. And 12 brave SEALs, somewhere in hostile territory, were counting on people like her to ensure there would be a base worth returning to when their ordeal finally ended. But Sarah Martinez was no longer the same person who had tied her hair back and started meal prep just 12 hours earlier. The betrayal she had witnessed and the attack she had helped prevent had awakened something fierce and protective in her. If terrorists wanted to use her kitchen as a weapon, they would find that the woman who controlled it was far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Saturday morning brought news that changed everything. At 0530 hours, just as Sarah was beginning her usual pre-dawn preparations, her secure phone rang with an emergency call from Admiral Crawford himself. "Ms. Martinez, I need you in the command center immediately. We have a situation." Sarah left Janet in charge of breakfast prep and hurried to the command center, where she found a level of activity that dwarfed even the previous day's crisis response. Multiple screens displayed satellite feeds, communication intercepts, and tactical maps. In the center of it all stood Admiral Crawford, Captain Rodriguez, and several personnel Sarah didn't recognize, including 2 women in combat fatigues with the bearing of Special Operations soldiers. "Sarah," Admiral Crawford said as she approached, "I'm about to ask something of you that goes far beyond your normal duties. The intelligence we've gathered from yesterday's attempted attack has revealed a critical opportunity, but it requires someone with your specific knowledge and skills." One of the women in combat gear stepped forward. She was tall, athletic, with short blonde hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "I'm Commander Lisa Hayes, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. My team specializes in hostage rescue operations." Sarah's heart rate increased as she understood the implication. "You found where they're holding SEAL Team 7? "We have," Commander Hayes confirmed. "But the situation is more complex than a standard rescue operation. The terrorists are holding our people on a fortified island approximately 200 nautical miles southwest of here. The facility appears to be an abandoned research station that they've converted into a stronghold." Admiral Crawford activated a wall display showing satellite imagery of a small island with concrete structures surrounded by dense vegetation. "The problem is that this facility has sophisticated detection systems that make a conventional assault nearly impossible. Any approach by sea or air would be detected long before our forces could reach the hostages. However, Commander Hayes continued, yesterday's interrogation of the captured infiltrator revealed something interesting. The terrorists are expecting a supply delivery to their island facility. Food and medical supplies that were supposed to be provided by their operatives on this base. Sarah began to understand where this was heading, but the implications were staggering. You want me to help you disguise a rescue team as a supply delivery? More than that, Admiral Crawford said gravely. We need you to go with them. The supply manifest we recovered shows very specific food requirements, including dietary restrictions and preparation methods that suggest someone with professional culinary training. If we send the wrong supplies or they're prepared incorrectly, it could blow the cover of the entire operation. Sarah felt the weight of the request settling on her shoulders. They were asking her to leave the safety of the base, to accompany a team of special operations soldiers into hostile territory where 12 brave men were being held prisoner. It wasn't a request that anyone could make lightly, and it wasn't one she could accept without understanding the full scope of the mission. What exactly would my role be? Sarah asked. Commander Hayes pulled up a detailed tactical plan on one of the screens. You would accompany a 4-person rescue team aboard a vessel disguised as a supply boat. Your job would be to ensure that the food delivery appears legitimate while my team positions for the actual rescue operation. Once we've secured the hostages, you would help evacuate them using the same supply boat. The risks are significant, Admiral Crawford added with characteristic honesty. If the deception is discovered, you would be in immediate danger along with the rescue team. There's also the possibility that the operation could fail, leaving you stranded in hostile territory. Sarah looked around the command center, taking in the faces of the people who were asking her to risk everything for 12 men she had served meals to countless times. She thought about Jake Morrison's tired eyes when he had requested field rations for his team. She thought about Chief Bradley's stories and his weakness for apple pie. She thought about Marcus's betrayal and how it might have contributed to their capture. When do we leave? She asked. The next few hours passed in a blur of mission planning and preparation. Sarah found herself in the strange position of learning basic combat procedures while simultaneously planning a meal service for terrorists. The supply manifest that Marcus had helped create specified foods that could sustain a large group for several weeks, including fresh vegetables, protein sources, and cooking supplies. Commander Hayes introduced Sarah to her rescue team, Lieutenant Rodriguez, a communications specialist, Chief Petty Officer Jackson, an explosives expert, and Petty Officer Kim, a medic and weapons specialist. All three were experienced in hostage rescue operations, but they had never worked with a civilian whose primary expertise was food preparation. The key to this operation, Commander Hayes explained during the final briefing, is that everyone has to play their role perfectly. Ms. Martinez, you're not just along for the ride. You're the reason this plan has any chance of working. The terrorists will be expecting a specific type of delivery from specific people, and you have to sell that deception completely. Sarah nodded, though part of her couldn't believe she was sitting in a military briefing discussing infiltration tactics and rescue operations. 24 hours ago, her biggest concern had been menu planning and inventory management. The supply boat departed Naval Base Coronado at 1,400 hours, disguised as a commercial fishing vessel with modifications that weren't immediately visible. Sarah was dressed as a civilian contractor, complete with identification documents that Commander Hayes assured her would pass initial scrutiny. The boat's cargo hold contained the requested supplies along with carefully concealed weapons and equipment for the rescue team. As San Diego disappeared behind them, Sarah found herself experiencing a mixture of terror and determination that she had never felt before. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, and somewhere ahead lay an island where 12 American warriors were depending on her to help bring them home. The journey to the target island took 6 hours, during which Commander Hayes briefed Sarah on what to expect when they arrived. The terrorists had established a routine for supply deliveries that included specific protocols for unloading cargo and inspection procedures. Sarah would need to interact normally with hostile personnel while the rescue team positioned themselves for the assault. Remember, Commander Hayes said as the island appeared on the horizon, you're not a soldier. You're a contractor doing a job. Be professional, be calm, and don't try to be heroic. Your job is to sell the deception and, then, stay out of our way when the shooting starts. The island was larger than it had appeared in satellite imagery, with rocky cliffs rising from the water and dense vegetation covering most of the interior. The research facility was located in a natural harbor on the island's north side, with concrete buildings that looked functional but not particularly threatening from a distance. As their boat approached the dock, Sarah could see armed guards positioned around the facility. They were dressed in military-style clothing but carried weapons that suggested professional training. These weren't desperate amateurs, they were organized, disciplined, and dangerous. A small boat with 2 armed men came out to escort them to the dock. Commander Hayes and her team maintained their cover as boat crew members while Sarah prepared to present the supply manifest to whoever was in charge of the facility. The docking procedure went smoothly, with Sarah playing her role as a food service contractor who was simply delivering supplies as requested. The terrorist leader, a middle-aged man with a scar across his left cheek, reviewed her paperwork while his men began unloading cargo. "You're late," the leader said in accented English. "Supply chain issues," Sarah replied, using the explanation Commander Hayes had coached her to give. "But everything you requested is here, plus some additional protein sources that should help with the dietary restrictions you mentioned." For 20 minutes, Sarah supervised the unloading of supplies while Commander Hayes and her team positioned themselves around the facility. The terrorists seemed satisfied with the delivery, but Sarah could sense an underlying tension in their behavior that suggested they were expecting trouble. Then, as she was checking off the last items on the supply manifest, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood run cold, Jake Morrison's voice, calling out from one of the concrete buildings. "Sarah? Sarah Martinez? Is that really you?" The terrorist leader spun around, his eyes narrowing as he looked from Sarah to the building where the voice had come from. In that moment, Sarah realized that their cover was blown. The SEAL team had recognized her voice and called out, not knowing that they were compromising the rescue operation. "You know the prisoners," the leader demanded, raising his weapon. Sarah's mind raced through possible responses, but she knew that lying would only make the situation worse. The terrorists would quickly discover the truth, and the rescue team wasn't yet in position for their assault. "I run the mess hall at Naval Base Coronado," she said, deciding that honesty might be her only option. "I've served meals to those men hundreds of times." The terrorist leader's expression changed from suspicion to something approaching satisfaction. "Then, you're not a contractor. You're military personnel. And that means you're a valuable addition to our collection." Everything happened at once. The leader began shouting orders to his men while raising his weapon toward Sarah. Commander Hayes appeared from behind a storage building, her rifle already aimed. The distinctive crack of suppressed gunfire echoed across the facility as the rescue team engaged multiple targets simultaneously. Sarah dropped to the ground as gunfire erupted around her, her culinary training providing no preparation for the chaos of a firefight. But, as she lay pressed against the concrete dock, she could hear Jake Morrison and the other SEALs calling out from their holding area, and she knew that whatever happened next, the rescue operation was underway. Commander Hayes and her team moved with deadly precision, clearing terrorist positions while advancing toward the building where the hostages were being held. Sarah crawled behind a stack of supply crates, watching in amazement as the 4-person rescue team systematically eliminated a force that outnumbered them 3-1. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours to Sarah. When the shooting finally stopped, Commander Hayes was standing over the terrorist leader's body while her team secured the facility. Chief Petty Officer Jackson was already working on the locks to the hostage holding area. "Sarah!" Jake Morrison's voice called out as the door to their prison opened. "I can't believe you're here." One by one, the members of SEAL Team 7 emerged from their captivity. They were thinner than when Sarah had last seen them, showing signs of mistreatment and deprivation, but they were alive and mobile. Jake Morrison looked around the dock area with the tactical awareness of a warrior, immediately assessing the situation and the escape route. "How bad is everyone's condition?" Commander Hayes asked as her medic began evaluating the rescued SEALs. "We're mobile," Jake replied. "Hungry, dehydrated, but ready to get out of here." Sarah found herself crying with relief as she watched the men she had worried about for days walk free. But their escape was far from assured. Radio chatter from the terrorist communications equipment suggested that reinforcements were already en route to the island. "We need to move now," Commander Hayes announced. "This facility will be swarming with hostiles within the hour." The evacuation to their supply boat was complicated by the fact that they now had 16 people instead of the planned 5. The vessel was large enough, but the journey back to friendly waters would take 6 hours, during which they could be tracked and intercepted by enemy forces. As the boat pulled away from the island, Sarah found herself sitting next to Jake Morrison, who was still looking at her with amazement. "I don't understand how you're here," he said. "How did a mess hall supervisor end up on a hostage rescue mission?" Sarah smiled, feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. "It's a long story. But someone had to make sure you guys got fed properly when you got home." The journey back to Naval Base Coronado was tense but uneventful. Commander Hayes maintained radio contact with base operations while her team provided medical attention to the rescued SEALs. Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of meal planning, using the remaining supply boat provisions to prepare food for men who hadn't had a proper meal in days. As the California coast appeared on the horizon, Sarah reflected on everything that had changed since SEAL Team 7's capture. She had begun the week as a mess hall supervisor whose biggest challenge was menu planning and inventory management. She was ending it as someone who had helped rescue 12 brave warriors from terrorist captivity. But, more than that, she had discovered capabilities and courage she never knew she possessed. The woman who had spent years nurturing others through food and service had proven that she could stand up when called upon to take action in the most dangerous circumstances. Naval Base Coronado appeared in the distance, its familiar buildings and security perimeter representing safety, home, and the successful completion of a mission that no one could have imagined when it began. SEAL Team 7 was coming home, and Sarah Martinez had played a crucial role in making that possible. As their boat approached the base dock, Sarah could see crowds of personnel waiting to welcome the rescued SEALs home. But she also knew that her own role in the operation would remain classified, known only to the people who had planned and executed the rescue mission. That was fine with her. She wasn't looking for recognition or fame. She was looking forward to getting back to her kitchen, back to the routine of preparing meals for warriors, back to the quiet satisfaction of serving those who served their country. But she would never again underestimate the importance of her role or the trust that others placed in her. The mess hall supervisor who had once worried about menu planning and delivery schedules had proven that when heroes are needed, they can emerge from the most unexpected places. Jake Morrison and the 11 other members of SEAL Team 7 were safe, their ordeal finally over. And Sarah Martinez had learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by those who carry weapons, but by those who choose to stand up when everything they care about is threatened. The boat touched the dock at Naval Base Coronado at 2,247 hours, and 12 warriors who had been given up for lost stepped back onto American soil. Behind them came a woman whose courage had helped make their rescue possible, ready to return to a job that would never look quite the same again.